Hello there. In this video we're going to show you how you can create a pendant similar to the one shown on the screen there. It's a Korean style pendant with a freedom pattern. And if we go to Fluid Designer for 3D printing, if we click on Group Library first of all, just to refresh the menu system here, if I scroll down and have a look at Korean patterns, you'll see that there's a range of patterns available here which have been created for you, and these patterns can be used in a variety of ways, not just in creating jewellery but in creating a whole range of things. But if I just drag and drop this Korean pattern onto the workspace, and let me just switch on the screencast keys, I'm just holding down the centre mouse button and just rocking it, you can see what the object looks like. And we can see over here the sizes, so it's 21mm approximately by 21mm, and it's 2mm thick. Now I could put a chain directly through the hole here, or I can attach a connector to this object, and I can do that by using the append function, and we'll find the sorry, let me just refresh this again. You'll find the connectors under 3D templates connectors, and if we're going to make a pendant we probably want a minimum hole size of 3mm or perhaps larger. So yeah, I'm going to append this wire connector with a 3mm diameter hole to this object here, and so I need to go to File and Append and go up through the menu system until you get to Groups. So we've been using the Korean pattern, freedom pattern. We now want a connector, so I go to Connectors and I want a wire connector with a 3mm diameter hole, and it's the object that I need. So it's a wire connector with a 3mm diameter hole object, and I append that from the library. And if I just drag this panel down a little bit, I can highlight the wire connector there. Now I need to position it, so if I just go to View and Top View, and you can see that they're both moving together at the moment, and the reason for that is that proportional editing is switched on, and we can switch off proportional editing by pressing the O key on the keyboard. O key creates the circle proportional editing window, so I've switched that off for the moment, and therefore I can move this object up. Now this is not pointing in the right direction, so I want to rotate it, and I can rotate it about the x-axis 90 degrees. That's not quite enough, let me do it again. Rotate x-axis 90 degrees, so that's now facing the direction that I want. It's a little bit too long, so if I press the Tab key and go into edit mode and highlight the control point at the bottom there, I can press X on the keyboard and delete that control point. I can either pull this control point up until it's about there in the center, or I could have deleted it and pulled the other control point down. Same difference. So I'll press A to deselect that control point, and the Tab key to come out of edit mode. Now when we join these two objects together, the object that I select last, and I'm going to select the freedom pattern last, those properties will be maintained, and the shape of this connector will change to be the same shape as the Korean pendant. Korean pendant has got a thickness, as we can see here, the bevel object, it's got a cross section of 1mm by 2mm. The connector is a rounded cross-section diameter of 1mm. But when I hold down the Shift key and click on the Korean pendant, so I've got two objects selected, if I go to Tools, Object Tools and join them together, notice that the connector takes on the same thickness as the Korean freedom pattern pendant there. Okay, so there's my pendant created. If I didn't want them to be the same thickness, if I do Control Z and Control Z to undo that action, so that I go back to two objects, if you want to maintain this with its current shape, and join it to the pendant, then the thing to do is to go to Tools, Object Tools and convert it to a mesh. Highlight the pendant, go to Tools, Object Tools and convert that to a mesh. And then if you highlight the connector, hold down the Shift key and highlight the pendant and then join them together, this time the shape of the connector doesn't change. So that's what happens in mesh mode. If you're in curve mode, you join the two curves together, the thickness of the connector will be the same as the thickness of the main body of the pendant. So that's one way of creating a Korean Freedom pattern pendant. And there are lots and lots of patterns in Fluid Designer, some of which you can, like the Korean ones, I'll just go into Korean again. All of these can be sized to be pendants by just adding a connector, or if you like, you don't need to add the connector, you can just put a chain through them. And lots of other things like these astrological symbols, for example. Now notice some of them don't have a border around them and some of them do. If you've got a border around, you can obviously attach a connector to it. Now if I just go to File and New again, and I'm back in the Pendants folder here. Now if I scroll down the Pendants folder and I'm looking for Korean, so H-I-J-K, okay, in the Pendants folder you will also find the Korean pendant with the Freedom pattern. Now if I drag and drop this onto the workspace and just I'll just switch on screencast keys. If I scroll back, you see there's this grey area. I can't see it when I'm not in top view, but if I go to view and top view, you see this grey area here. Well, let's see what happens when I move the pendant out of the I move the pendant out of the way, the Korean pattern pendant. What you can see in the background there is a JPEG image. This is an image that's been created and saved as a digital file, as a bitmap file. And essentially, to create this pendant, what I've done is drawn around that image using a NURBS circle around the outside. So the outline of this, the circular bit, is actually a NURBS circle that's been sized up to fit around that image in the background. And then these lines on the middle here are actually all NURBS paths, constructor path. So if I just go into edit mode by pressing the tab key on the keyboard, and if I click on a few points there, so I've highlighted hopefully all 3 points along that NURBS path there, and if I press X and delete the vertices, you'll see that line disappears. So let me see how I can put that line back in. Well, if I press the tab key on the keyboard, if I press add curve and add a construct a NURBS path, you'll see that it appears there in the center of the screen. And if I just move that down, move it over to the right, and if I rotate it about the Z-axis, you can see I can line it up with that black line. Remember, the black line is actually in the background. It's part of my image in the background. And so if I click on that NURBS path again, and if I go into edit mode, and if I switch off, well no, I'll leave the snap on because I've got a fine grid here as it is. If I press G on the keyboard, I can grab that point and then reposition it. I can select another control point and I can adjust that control point, and G and adjust that control point, and G and adjust that control point, and G and adjust that control point until I'm happy that it's lined up with the black line in the background there. Once I'm happy that that's the case, if I press the tab key to come out of edit mode, and with this NURBS path line selected, if I hold down the shift key and click on to the rest of the object and go to Tools, Object Tools and Join, you'll see that that completes my pendant. Now you can see there's a slight error at the bottom here. So if I go into edit mode again with the tab key and I click on that point there, if I just switch off the snap, if I just press G on the keyboard and just move it and reposition it there, so I haven't got any bits, strange bits sticking out. Okay, and I just need to look at the top as well and check that it all fits okay. You have to be careful and look around this. Yeah, so if I press the tab key to come out of edit mode, I've then rebuilt my Korean Freedom pendant just by putting that path back in there. So that's how all of these have been built. Now the image itself, if you want to add an image to the background, you actually need to go up here to where it says Show Debug Tools and click the Blender interface. We've got to switch from Fluid Designer interface, unfortunately, to the Blender interface if you want this background image. And the Properties panel, when you're in the Blender menu system, is slightly more comprehensive than Fluid Designer. It's got a few too many things really, a lot of them to do with creating movies and the like. But if you look here, we've got this option for a background image, and you can add an image. And the image that I've added here is this Korean Pattern Freedom image, and it's a JPEG. It's just a picture. So if you've got any images on your desktop, you can add an image here from the Properties panel, tick Background Images, and you may find that you need to want to position the X, position the Y, and try and get it in the center, and you probably will need to size it up to an appropriate size, and you would probably want it to fit on the inside of the default grid. So that's the kind of size that you would be looking for. And the amount that you will have to size this will depend upon the JPEG image that you use. And you'll have to play around with this, and essentially what I would suggest you do is select a size, put a path on here, and set the thickness to be 1:2 and see that it's okay. Alternatively, what you can do is, if you just zoom in here, you need to be looking for a thickness of this line to be approximately 1 millimeter. So you can see if we're there, the thickness of the black line is much too small for 1 millimeter. When we're there, that's millimeters. In fact, I think, yeah, that's 1 millimeter there. So each of these boxes is 1 millimeter, so you need to size this up until the thickness of the black line is approximately 1 millimeter. And then you can put your NURBS paths and NURBS curves and NURBS circles onto the top, and then apply some cross-section to them to give them thickness. So that's how this Korean pattern and many of the other patterns have been created. So once you've actually added your image to the background, you can switch out of the Blender menu and return to the Fluid Designer menu. Okay, so that's an example of creating a Korean Freedom pattern pendant. And that's the end of this particular video. Thank you.